the more simple and memorable a logo is, the more effective it becomes, not just for people to remember it, but for the product or service or organization using it to deploy it, to produce it in whatever medium they have to use it on.
What's up, branding experts? Arek here at Ebaqdesign, and welcome to On Branding Podcast, the only podcast where I interview branding experts to give you actionable tips on everything branding and beyond. And in this episode, I interview Armin Vit, and we talk about tips for effective logo design. And Armin has established himself as an influential figure in logo design space through his blog called Brand New, which is a very popular blog in design community, where you can basically find a lot of logo and brand identity reviews, including redesigns on some of the top brands. But Armin also worked at the iconic design firm Pentagram in its New York office, and now he also works with clients under his own design firm under consideration. So Armin is an expert when it comes to logos, and that's why I really wanted to have him on our podcast today. Hello, Armin. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on our podcast.
Sure thing. Thank you for having me, Arek.
Thanks. So you've reviewed countless of new logos, and so you're probably the most experienced person when it comes to critiquing them. So we would love you to share with us some tips for designing an effective logo. So hopefully it's going to help us become better or just more effective at designing logos and brand identities. So let's imagine that we have to design a new logo for a brand, whether it is for our client or our own brand. So now we have a bunch of ideas and we got some concepts and how to judge them, because we either don't have any criteria or our criteria is very vague and kind of random. So let's start talking about what makes a great logo from the aesthetic points of view.
Yeah, so I think one thing that holds true, after 50 years, 60 years of logo design is that the more simple and memorable a logo is, the more effective it becomes, not just for people to remember it, but for the product or service or organization using it to deploy it, to produce it in whatever medium they have to use it on. So I think that remains the cornerstone of a good logo design, whether, how simple it is. And that doesn't mean that it has to be boring or minimal. It's just how direct is it in its message, in its execution? Does it communicate what you want it to do, what you want it to communicate as quickly as possible?
Right, so it needs to communicate the right thing. So you have to do some kind of a discovery phase or research phase, research your competitors, get to know the company. If it's a startup, what's the vision for the future? And perhaps if it's a rebrand, then you need to get to know the company and its history, just to determine how you can take them into the future, right? So, but also talking about like things, pure aesthetics, like proportions, scalability, alignment, and those type of things. What would you say is the most important? What are the most important aspects of, in terms of aesthetics?
All of the things that you mentioned are important. So proportions, scale, how one element relates to another in terms of spatial relationship. If you have something with multiple strokes, are those strokes the same thickness? Do they have the same spacing in between? The colors, are they pleasant to use on print and online? Or is the typeface that you choose pleasant? And I think pleasant is subjective. Obviously, everything here is subjective, but I think
Yes.
Once you start like really analyzing what the elements that you're using and being very critical about what does this say? What does this typeface choice say? And again, it's subjective, but I think based on, if you compare it to other logos in similar industries, or even if they're different industries, but that you want to achieve something similar to those logos. And it's not that you're going to copy it, but if you think that the Airbnb logo is successful in some way or another, what about it is is appealing to you, and what from it can you replicate in your own logo.
Right. So you suggest to basically do what you do. So you analyze different logos and rebrands, and then based on that, we can learn what makes a great logo, right? Or
Yeah,
what makes a bad logo.
yeah, I think it's important to know what's out there and and sort of see what other designers react to positively, so that then you can make an informed decision that, oh, okay, so something like this works. And even if you don't know why, just knowing that a large group of people, thinking specifically about brand new or blog, where, all of a
Yeah.
sudden, if you have 20 people saying this is great, then you have to think, okay, what makes this great? What can I take from this and apply in my own way to my own logo? So without those points of reference, it becomes really hard to just become an expert and know what's good or bad if you're isolated from what's out there.
Right. So basically, just to sum up, is about colors and fonts and shapes, and using those elements of visual language to design something that is visually appealing, right? Uh,
Yep.
so, but it's not just about the logo, right? Because logo is like a centerpiece of everything. But this gets us closer to talking more about identity system. Because since logos needs to be simple, as you mentioned earlier, in order to become memorable, we can show a lot of more creativity in actually in executing the identity system, right? So can we just talk about that? I just wanted you to share with us some of your thoughts on designing an identity system, because you have a lot of experience looking at uh, different, maybe unusual ways of how designers use logos or its element or some supporting graphic um, additional graphics, graphic elements to build that identity system.
Yep. One thing with logos is that a logo can only do so much, which is a good thing, because then it just becomes a representation of the company, product, or service. But then it's what accompanies that logo, that complements it, that completes the message that you're trying to convey, and it allows you, an identity system allows you to build on the attributes that you want to portray. So if you want it to be happy, you can have colorful illustrations, you can have photos of smiling people, you can have a bold, cheerful font, whatever that may be. All those elements have to support the logo and complement the logo, so that you're able to convey a more complete message that a logo simply cannot deliver. So it opens up the opportunities to do many different things that can start to be more interesting, that can start to be more daring, more ambitious than whatever you try to do with the logo, because then these are the things that you're going to put on a brochure, that you're going to put on social media, that you're going to put on advertising, whatever that may be. So you have bigger canvases, you have more, if it has motion, or if it's a TV ad or a YouTube ad, all of a sudden you can tell a story in a matter of 15 seconds or 5 seconds that you just can't do with a logo. So that is the identity is almost as important as the logo, in that you're able to fully realize whatever message is you're trying to say.
Right. So it's about that big idea, right? So as you said, your identity can complement your logo, or maybe sometimes can contrast with the logo, right? So if the logo is super simple, maybe you can show creativity through identity system, and then you also need to think about the role you want your logo to play in that identity system, right? And he also mentioned, which is really important, to design a lot of different applications and different mockups to show how that logo will look like in real life, for your clients so that they can envision and they can imagine. And also it's an opportunity for us designers to test the viability of that uh, logo design concept, right? Because if we test that design in different applications, we can come to conclusion that it needs some refinements.
Yeah, it's really important to prototype as early as possible so that you can make adjustments to a logo if needed. So, you can put a logo on a white piece of paper and it will look great, but that's really how logos are seen. So, once you shrink that logo down to the size of a business card or a social media avatar, it really changes how it's perceived. So the more applications that you prototype and test out, the stronger the logo will be, and you can see then you can start seeing how the identity complements that, and what are the elements that work well on print, online, in motion, things like that. So the more that you can test out upfront, the better.
Right. So now let's talk about some good examples of logo design. So because you review a lot of brand identities, so perhaps some rebrands of famous brands so that we can all relate. Can you give us some examples that would really make a point of good design or effective, or you think the new logo is super effective or well designed?
Yeah, so the trick is that different logos are effective for different needs, for different companies, for different situations and contexts. So one logo that, I mean, a logo that is right for someone may not be right for someone else. So a lot of it has to do with, is it the right logo and the right identity for the right client at the right time. So for example, the LA 28, the Los Angeles 2028 Olympics logo that just came out, that is, if you look at it in relation to other Olympic logos, you're like, well, that's super weird. It has this chunky L, chunky 2, chunky 8, and then it has an A that changes dramatically. They're done by different people, have different illustrations, completely different styles. And you might think,
Right.
well, that's not right for the Olympics. Not necessarily. I mean, yes, in a way, but it is right for the Olympics in Los Angeles in 2028, where they obviously one thing is that they have to build a little bit of buzz around it for the next 8 years, and that logo does that. But at the same time, it represents LA in a different way. It signals that the Olympics, when they come back to the U.S. and specifically to Los Angeles, is going to be wild. So I think that logo is right for that Olympics event. If you look at another recent logo like Intel, it's a
Yes.
boring logo. It's just not exciting at all. The identity
Yes.
is not that great, but it's Intel. It's just if they make chips for computers, it'd be nice if they made chips to eat, but they make microchips, so it's not exactly exciting, and they're not a company known for being bold and very provocative or anything. So it's a logo that, for better or for worse, it fits the client. You don't have to like it. I don't have to like it, but it gets the job done in a way that makes sense.
Right. So you gave us two examples of LA Olympics, which is a very flexible identity, like ever changing the identity system, where A takes different forms, different expressions. And then we have on the other hand, we have Intel logo, which is a very simple, kind of like Uber-like style, minimalist. Just because Olympics games, you have to design a new logo every 4 years, right? So if you do something more creative or even trendy, it's just for this one off game, right? Every 4 years you're gonna have to design a new logo, but for Intel the logo needs to be timeless, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now on the other hand, what are some of the bad examples of logo design that we can learn from? So maybe some rebrands that didn't go well, and I know there is quite a lot of them, and the reasons why, and so what are maybe we can just think about like some of the most common mistakes that designers make, and what's the cost of that bad design?
Yeah, so to flip the conversation on Intel, I think that's a bad logo in the sense that they didn't take an opportunity to really change how we perceive the company. Like my impression of Intel right now is actually probably worse than it was before, because at least before they had a swoosh, and not that I like swooshes, but at least they had something. And now my impression is that it's just more boring than that. Like they're not even doing a swoosh, which, for better or for worse, at least it was it had some dynamism to it. So I think it's so easy for a logo to be perceived or used as positive or negative. So that's one example that's recent. I think you can look at something like the Gaap logo from what's it been now, like 10 years, I think, when they redesigned. They had that really nice, elongated, thin serif logo, and then one day, out of nowhere, they changed to something like Helvetica with a gradient square, and no explanation, no nothing, and just like, here you go. And people were freaking out. I think it was the first time that there was a collective freak out about a logo, and I think the
Yeah.
main problem there was lack of communication. That there was no warning, there was no press release, there was no acknowledgement that this has changed. So a lot of times, whether the logo is good or bad, if there's no communication, if there's no effective, again, communication with the audience that the logo is intended for, that's where things go wrong. You can have a great logo, but if people don't know what to make of it or they didn't expect it, that's where problems start. So I think being clear about the intentions of a new logo it's almost as important as whatever the logo looks like.
Now we are going to take a quick break here, but we will be right back. Listen, my mission is to help people design iconic brands. So whether you're a business leader who wants to be more intentional with branding and all of its aspects, or you are a creative who wants to attract powerful clients and truly be able to help them with branding, then you need to start with a discovery session and then develop a strategy that will inform all your creative work. And everything you need to learn how to do that you can find in my online courses at ebaqdesign.com/shop, where I share with you my worksheets, case studies, video tutorials, and other additional resources to help you feel safe and strong about your process. And now let's get back to our conversation with Armin Vit. Right, and I just wanted to add here, Tropicana would be another example, right? And with the similar problem, which is lack of communication. So what happened is, I think they just disregarded the fact that and the brand equity built around that straw with an orange and this familiarity, and so customers couldn't find the Tropicana packaging and were outraged by this change that was not really like it wasn't introduced to the public, right?
Yeah. And I think that one, me being a graphic designer and literally having written about the Tropicana redesign, like a few days prior, I walked into my grocery store because I used to drink Tropicana orange juice. And even knowing that they had changed, I was like, where is the Tropicana juice? And, it was just even with me, like having that understanding and that knowledge that it changed, it was just like, my muscle memory of knowing where the Tropicana box was and what it looked like, which was that big orange with the straw coming out of it, all of a sudden wasn't there, and my brain just went short circuit, like it's not here, move on. So I think when that happens to at a consumer product level where you have thousands of people buying it every day and you don't let them know that, hey, this is changing not a little bit but drastically, that's where again you run into big problems.
Right. So just to sum up for our listeners, so logo fails or bad logo design. Uh, so obviously, if you're not good with aesthetics, if you don't align elements, you don't care about proportions, you just make some rookie mistakes, then your logo is probably gonna fail. It's not going to be a good logo. But other than that, if it's a rebrand, you need to pay attention to the equity and be really good at communication. So communicating the change uh, to customers and also being able to um, explain the change uh, is really vital, right? It's really important.
Correct.
So since we talk about some good and bad examples in logo design, and you've observed a lot of redesigns and how logos evolve over time, uh, so you probably noticed some trends. So uh, can you just recall, is any trend that crossed your mind for that is maybe going on right now, that are you think that are rooted in principles of good design and we should pay attention to? Uh, for example, like this simplicity, I know you mentioned that this is a bad example. Another example would be Uber is like extreme simplicity and minimalism. Do you think it's a trend or is it going to stay? And what other trends did you notice in logo design?
Yeah, I think the minimalism trend is something that has been around for a long time. That's how design, how corporate identity started by being, excuse me, by being minimal, and part of it was because of the limited ability to reproduce things, that they just had to be fairly minimal designs. But I think the reason why that has been sustained for such a long time is that that's what in part makes good design, as we've talked about. But
Yeah.
I think it can also be harmful when you just use it as like that, as a style where you're just going with a generic sans serif because it looks cool, or because that's what everybody else is doing. So you have to be really be careful that you're using a trend like that for the right reasons. And I think in the past, I think when Airbnb came out in 2014, then Google redesigned from their serif logo to geometric sans serif in 2015. I think that really kicked off a really heavy trend of just that geometric sans serif wordmark approach that we've been seeing still recently, but in the past 2 years, uh, especially after the redesign of Chobani, which is a brand of Greek yogurt here in the US, when they redesigned, they introduced a really kind of like bubbly, not bubbly, but like roundy serif, very chunky, very
Yeah.
friendly. And that really changed the conversation, where in the past, I think that was 2017, 18 maybe, and in the past 2 years, we've seen a lot of companies in different markets and industries go that route, because all of a sudden that became acceptable, and the it became associated with a successful product. So whenever you have something that is successful and does something different, people are like, "Oh, I want that. Like, I want to follow that."
Hmm.
And so we've seen a lot of that recently. And I think now, and probably as a reaction to what Airbnb and Google started. And now we're seeing, in a limited way, a little bit of a trend towards really wacky, not necessarily wacky, but more daring, more unique typography that really differentiates any product or service from anything else. And again, I think that trends are usually a reaction to the trend that came before. So, we went from kind of like really stark minimalism to
Yeah.
really expressive typography, and it's a process. And I think in 5 years we're going to go back to the geometric sensors, because we got tired of whatever's happening right now.
Right. So it's about finding that balance between those extremes, right? If it's extreme minimalism, maybe it becomes too boring and you just blend in and you look like everyone else, looks like every other logo. And if you go uh, on the opposite, uh, if you just make it too like you just go like make it trendy, then the trends will change, and so we'll have to your logo will just not be in fashion anymore, right? So it will be a fad that is just it will require a new redesign, right? So you just have to like find a balance between those extremes. So just to sum up for our listeners, I've taken some notes to make a summary. So the logo needs to be simple, distinctive, memorable. It's important to test your logo on variety of different applications in the prototyping phase, and you need to find out the balance. So between different trends or minimalism and so on. So and the last thing, you need to pay attention to details, proportions, lettering, colors, alignment, and so on. Do you think I missed anything? Do you want to add anything as tips, as some of the tips for to design more effective logos?
No, I think you covered everything. The one thing I would add is, have a strategy in place with your client about how your design gets communicated. Because even if you get the proportions right, if you get the colors right and the typography right, if the client does not communicate that to their audience in the right way at the right time, all that hard work goes away.
Right. So all that is important, plus communication, as we discussed earlier. So as we are approaching the end of our episode, I just wanted to ask you more about how to find more about you for designers who just want to connect with you or clients who want to work with you. And I'll include those links in the description.
Yep, our website is underconsideration.com. From there, you can find the different things that we do, mainly the blog Brand New. So that's underconsideration.com/brand new. We do the Brand New conference. We do an event called First Round. On social media, we are on Instagram and Twitter at UCLLC, as well as at Armin Vit. We don't spend a lot of time on social media posting, but we're there. We'll pay attention to messages.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Armin. I appreciate
My pleasure.
that.
Yep, my pleasure.
So this is it for today's episode, and make sure to go and check out Armin's website and follow him on social media. And you can find all the links on this episode's page at ebaqdesign.com/podcast/13. So thanks for tuning in, and if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to my podcast for more tips on branding, strategy and design. This was Arek Dvornechuck from Ebaqdesign.